Who will lead the Terps pass rush this year?
You are Locked On Terps, your daily podcast on the Maryland Terps. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everyone? I'm Tre Moore, video content creator for 247 Sports and InsideMarylandSports.com, and host of Locked On Terps, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So thank you for making us part of your day. And today's episode is brought to you by the Gametime app. Download the Gametime app, create a code, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. We are going to be talking about the Maryland football's pass rush going into this year. Who will lead the Terps in sacks? Who will be the best in the run game? Who will lead us in tackle for losses? Will the Terps pass rush be enough this year? We're going to kind of hit on all this stuff. Obviously, it's a lot to talk about, but we'll continue to talk about it throughout the next couple of weeks and throughout going into the season and everything. But I did want to start to talk about the Maryland football pass rush because it's something that, honestly, we haven't really talked about a ton about the Maryland football pass rush in terms of interior defensive line, in terms of the defensive end group, the outside linebackers, all those different types of guys. Is Maryland pass rush going to be enough this year? And I do. I honestly have a lot of confidence in the Maryland's pass rush this year, specifically because we get just about everybody back in that room. And I think that's an important thing. Whenever you bring back an experienced group of guys up front, you're usually going to do some pretty good things if you bring back all your contributors from last year. And I think Maryland has an experienced group up front. I don't know about the depth. That's one of my question marks about it. I don't know how deep it is up front, and I don't know if it is probably deep enough in all the spots in terms of, do we have enough defensive linemen? Do we have enough defensive tackles to cover in case the starters get rest? That's one of my question marks. But in terms of the top guys, I really do like Maryland football's pass rush, and I think it could improve even going into next year, mainly because we bring everybody back. When you bring everybody back and you got more of an experienced group, and it was a group last year that it wasn't quite young, but I would put it on the younger side in terms of guys we're getting used to the Big Ten, whether that was Donnell Brown or Jordan Phillips' first year starting after being a redshirt from Tennessee. And even though some of the guys had played a little bit, like Quayshawn Fuller hadn't played a ton, but he had played some for Maryland football, but Kellen Wyatt as well. But it looked like it was kind of in between group where I wasn't sure what we were going to get last year. And we got solid production out of a lot of different guys. Solid production, though. I would say about a little bit above average from guys like Quayshawn Fuller on the edge and guys like Kellen Wyatt, the talented junior that's been playing since he's a freshman at Maryland. And so you got just above average production. And so I'm now looking at it and I'm saying, can we get to a spot where we're not just above average, but we're like we're pretty above average, not like one step above average, but can we get a couple more steps above average where the pass rush unit, I'm not saying it's going to be elite. I'm not saying it's going to be in the Big Ten's best, but it has a chance to be disruptive. It has a chance to put pressure on quarterbacks and stop the run when we need it to. Obviously, it's not going to be perfect. There's going to be games when teams can run against us. There's going to be games where teams can really pass block against us. But can it be fairly consistent where it's one of those places on our team that we look at as a strength as a part of our team? And I've looked at it as a strength this offseason because I think that we have guys up front that are experienced, that have been there before, and I think that are talented for the Terps. And so when I look at the interior defensive line with our defensive tackles, our nose tackles, when I think about Jordan Phillips and Tommy Aking-Basote, those are two guys that were starters last year for us, and they're pretty big bodies in there. And so when I think about Phillips and Aking-Basote, I think of two guys that have a chance to be honorable mention all Big Ten type of players, or maybe even a guy like Jordan Phillips I thought might have been our best defensive lineman. I think he has a chance to be right there, maybe third team all Big Ten. And there's some really good defensive linemen in the Big Ten. And it's not going to be an easy award to get, but I look at him as a potential really highly impact player. Same with Tommy Akingbessote. I thought he put some stuff together last year. He was a highly ranked recruit, and I think that he has a chance to be really good. And stopping the run is going to start with them. And I'm going to go ahead and say it. I think Maryland's going to be pretty solid against a lot of teams in the run. I don't know about the depth when we filter through a couple guys and we get a couple new guys in there, some of the younger guys along the defensive line like Taze Johnson. He's been pretty good for us, and I don't mind him. And the real question mark is who else is going to play inside for Maryland football. But I think that when you look at Phillips and Akingbessote, when they're fresh and when they're ready to go, it makes up a really good defensive line unit, interior defensive line unit for the Terps, and definitely a group that I think can also create some pass rush and force some pressure up the middle, which is also really important. And if we can stop the run game and force teams to get into third and long and make it harder on teams, and if we can help our secondary out, that this secondary for Maryland football, it's up in the air right there. It's iffy. It's one of our biggest question marks, and a big defensive line, a big year from our defensive line unit could be huge in determining really how good those guys are. It's kind of been the opposite for us. I feel like it's been like we've been able to get a lot of coverage sacks in the past just because we've had such good players out in the secondary. But now it's like, okay, we have a couple of new starters out there at cornerback, and our safety duo is pretty good. But they might not create as much of those in terms of those sacks that are called you would call those sacks coverage sacks, and you might not get as much as those. And you might need plays where our defensive line helps out our secondary, especially if it struggles. And I have confidence that Jordan Phillips and Akingbessote might be two of the most underrated players in the Big Ten. And I think they're going to do a good job as long as we can keep them fresh, kind of rotate different guys in and not make them play every single snap. But those two guys are pretty solid in terms of guys in the Big Ten. And then when I think about edge, Donnell Brown, Kellen Wyatt, and Quayshawn Fuller are all back and ready to go. And I'm thinking of those guys that each had above 3 sacks last year. And I'm thinking, okay, can they take a next step where I'm like, one of these guys ends up having a really good year? I don't know exactly who it is, to be honest. I don't have a guess, but I'm going to go with this. Who I think will lead the team in sacks next year. I'm going to go Kellen Wyatt. I think Kellen Wyatt's a talented player. He looked pretty good in the spring game for Maryland football. He had a couple of times where he just clearly beat one of our tackles, and I was like, oh, Kellen Wyatt looks good, and I really think it could be any of these 3 guys. But in terms of leading us in sacks, I'm going to go Kellen Wyatt. He's been playing since he's a freshman, and now's the year for him. His junior year. He's been experienced. He's been in the system now. He's not a young player anymore, and I don't determine a guy that I don't see him as a guy now that's like, oh, you still have a bunch of future ahead of you. You were a freshman, you were a sophomore, you played as a young guy, and a lot of people don't get to do that. And it's like, now it's your time to really step up into being a really solid pass rusher in the Big Ten. I don't think he's elite. I don't think he's going to be one of those type of guys, but I think he can be really solid. And same with Donnell Brown and Quayshawn Fuller. Both of those guys should be good players with another year under their belt, playing a ton of minutes for Maryland football. So I look at those couple of guys and I say, I like the edge group a lot, and that's without the couple of guys that didn't play very much last year. Neo Avery looked really good in Maryland football spring game. They have him listed as 6'4", 273. He looked big in the spring game, and so I'm looking at him as a guy that could potentially get in that rotation and really help out, as well as DJ Samuels, who also I thought looked pretty good in the spring game as a guy that could also help out at outside linebacker. He's listed at 6 feet, 246. And so I like kind of the young guys, the guys that are next up that could potentially really help us out next year. But it's going to be an interesting group. And I think in terms of leading us in run defense, I think that's got to be Jordan Phillips. What he does in the run game, he's really good. It's a mammoth guy in the middle of our defense, and he's a really good guy up the middle for us. And he's a guy that I'm surprised Tennessee let him out of our let him out of their hands. And I think he's the kind of the perfect type of player that I think that we need up in the middle. And he was really good last year in his first year playing real time in college football. People forget he redshirted at Tennessee. It wasn't like he got to play a ton at Tennessee. He redshirted and still put up a really solid year at Maryland and did some really good things for the Terps. So I'm looking at him as a guy that I think could lead us in kind of the run defense. And like I said, Kellen Wyatt could lead us in sacks. But I'm excited about this group. I think it has to be good for our defense to be on the level that it probably wants to be at. Because I think if this defensive line unit kind of disappoints, then it's going to make us struggle a lot, because I think there's going to be a lot more trust in that group. And I think we're going to send less blitzes and stuff, because I think one thing that people don't talk about, that I talked about a little bit yesterday with the linebacker room, is that Jason Barham is gone now, and he created a lot of the pass rush at times because we just line him up on the edge, and he was honestly maybe our best edge rusher at times. I really do believe that. But now that he's gone, it's going to be really be on these outside linebackers and DNs and kind of whatever you want to call them to create a lot of the pressure and to get to the quarterback, because Barham would kind of bail us out sometimes. When pass rush would be slow, you would stick him on the edge and we'd be fine. But none of the linebackers, none of the inside linebackers are really going to do that this year for us. I feel like maybe Ruben Hippolyte could do some of that, but I don't really see that, to be honest. And I see them really sticking with the inside linebacker role. So I think it's kind of important for the Terps to be able to use different guys in the pass rush, have different players. And that's why I think that Neo, Avery, and Samuels are going to be important to give us the mix. I think we have potential to keep guys fresh on the defensive end group, but the interior, there's not a ton of depth in there. And so it's going to be interesting to see kind of what players stick out, what players come together for Maryland football. But I do like this unit. I think it's not like the top of the Big Ten, but I think it's like middle top of the Big Ten. You know, you got your elite units, the Penn States with Abdul Carter, and you got Ohio State with Sawyer coming back, and JT, I don't know how exactly how to pronounce his name, and I don't really want to try, JT, and they got some good guys up there. And so I'm thinking that our pass rush is in a good spot, but I definitely wouldn't put it up there as amongst the elite. You know, Oregon's going to have some players, but I do like our pass rush overall for Maryland football. Let's talk about Maryland football. Just got rated on the new NCAA game. I will tell you about what rating they give us. And am I like, is it too high? Is it too low? I have some thoughts on that. I would tell you about that after this ad from the Gametime app. Have you ever wanted to go to a game at the last minute, like a Maryland Terrapins game, but finding tickets is hard? I've been there before. Buying tickets to your favorite events shouldn't be stressful. Gametime is a fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater near you. With killer deals on last-minute tickets and their best price guaranteed, you can stop stressing over the tickets and start getting hyped for the fun you'll have. Gametime has deals on tickets right up to the start of the event and even an hour after it starts. It's a place to find last-minute tickets and take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account or redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. So Maryland lands at an 85 overall for the new college football game. Here are my thoughts on it. I'm surprised. I'm really surprised. I don't know what I thought the Maryland football team would be, but I didn't think it was going to be an 85. I don't know if I kind of thought that everyone was going to be a lower, because there's some teams that I thought would be a little bit lower that ended up being a little bit higher. But basically where I saw this was, you guys can find it on Twitter or Instagram probably as well. But basically there's the new trailer came out for the college football game. And that's something that I think all of us are super excited for. We haven't had a new college football game in a while. And basically it was like, it was basically going through some of the gameplay and all these different things and some of the new features of the game. And then they went through the screens, and it was some of the Big Ten teams on there. and it basically showed Maryland's rating and everything, and Maryland was an 85 overall, and I thought that was honestly a pretty good rating for Maryland football. I honestly thought we would be much lower. I did not think that we would be that high. I thought we were gonna be like an 82, and not because I didn't think we deserved to be around an 85. I just always thought they would put us a tick lower and disrespect us. But to be completely honest, an 85 might even be too high. I don't want to be negative about it, but I think that an 85 gives us a good amount of respect for our team. Now, I'm going to have to see kind of what each player is rated, because that's going to be a different conversation in itself. But the fact that they gave us an 85 honestly kind of surprises me still. And so I have it pulled up right here. Here's some of the other teams in their rating, just so you guys can get some perspective. I'll name a couple, and I'll try to hit all the Big Ten teams. But Clemson's a 95, which seems a tick high for Clemson. And I've watched a lot of Clemson football, and I used to be a Trevor Lawrence fan at Clemson, but it's like they definitely don't seem that high. And so Michigan's at a 93, which I think makes sense about. I think Michigan could regress next year, and a 93 seems about right for them. But some of the other Big Ten teams, Illinois is an 87, which is interesting that Illinois is rated better than us at an 87. That's a pretty high rating, I feel like, for an Illinois. Iowa's an 85. They have Minnesota at an 85 as well, and Maryland at an 85. And Michigan State's at an 85. So a bunch of the Big Ten teams that are about on our tier are also rated in 85. And they have Miami at an 84. They have West Virginia at an 84. Duke at an 82. And they have Indiana at a 74. So it's an interesting kind of spot for us, and I don't think it's bad. I wonder, I don't know. I honestly don't know a ton about some of these other teams and what they've done this offseason, and I won't know a ton about these teams until I play them, until Maryland plays them, in terms of Michigan State and Iowa and Indiana and what they've done this offseason and kind of how good they are. But I feel like Maryland kind of being on the same level as an Iowa and a Michigan State, I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing. I know Michigan State has got some good things going this offseason, some good new transfers, and Iowa's good year in and year out, it seems like, even though it seems like their offense is always terrible, but they find a way to play good defense and win playing Big Ten football. But I think that when I think about us on the same level as them, I don't think it's really disrespectful to us. I honestly think that when you think about Maryland football and what we kind of where we rank, I kind of think that's about where we are. But there is one interesting thing. Our offense was rated higher than our defense. Our defense was only an 80. And so when I think about the roster overall, I do kind of tend to agree with that. When I think about the players on our team, I feel like the offense is the edge, specifically on like our best players. A lot of our best players and probably our highly rated guys. When I think about Roman Hemby, when I think about our wide receiver room, Caden Prather, Ty Felton, a lot of them are on the offensive side of the ball. And so it doesn't surprise me at all that our offense is higher and our defense is only an 80. That might be a tad low for our defense, but honestly, I think they got this right. I really thought they would disrespect us a little bit more and kind of put us in a worse spot and not have us as good of a rating. But honestly, an 85 to me is not bad at all for Maryland football. And I'm kind of looking forward to this game and seeing kind of what the individual player ratings are. I can't wait till that comes out. That's going to be a really exciting thing. And a whole lot of people are going to have a whole lot to say about that overall. But I think that we're rated properly. And let you guys make sure to let me know what you guys think we should be rated. I don't think they really disrespected us, what we've been, how we've lost a lot of different guys. I think it's about right, honestly. Let me know what you guys think. Let's talk about Maryland's offensive line. Is it a problem? Do the Terps need to fix some things up? What will this group be like? I'm concerned about the offensive line. To be completely honest with you guys, I'm pretty concerned. I think the thing is we've kind of gone through this a couple of years with Coach Locksley, and it kind of seems like he likes to bring in a bunch of transfers, and it doesn't seem like we're kind of developing our own guys as much as we would like along the offensive line. But we're going to be playing basically 5 new starters up front, and that in itself is scary. Last year it was 4 starters, but it kind of ended up being like it was at times, it was solid sometimes. It was a weird year for the offensive line, but I'm kind of concerned with having 5 new starters, and we have nobody that I would say like, yeah, he's the guy that I trust. And if you remember from last year, I felt pretty good about Delmar Glaze being a good player for Maryland football. I felt pretty good because he'd been a good player. And so he was a guy that was like, yeah, he could get drafted. And he ended up getting drafted in the 3rd round to the Raiders and has a chance to do some really good things for the Raiders. But I didn't look at anybody else like that along the Maryland offensive line last year that I was like completely confident in. And going into this year's group, I don't see anybody that I'm like, yeah, I'm super confident in him. And that's probably a concern when you're talking about the offensive line and really any position group on your team. I don't care really if it's quarterback, receiver, line, defensive line, corners. Like, it doesn't really matter. If you don't have a single guy in that room where you're like, yeah, I have confidence that he's going to be a pretty good player up front for Maryland football, then it's hard for me to feel good about the group. And there's bound to be, sure, maybe 1 or 2 guys that surprise you that are better than what you think, but there's bound to be a couple of guys that don't live up to being a starter in the Big Ten for Maryland football. And so I'm looking at this group and I'm scared a little bit. I'm scared for how much does the ceiling what's the ceiling for this group? Can we be a good group? Can we be a solid group? What's the ceiling? How good can this group be? I'm also scared about the floor. How low is the floor? Could this group just be terrible up front? I like, is this group going to be really bad? Like, I don't know exactly. And we brought in Isaiah Wright from Buffalo, which I think will help. And I think he's a guy that could potentially start right away. But the overall makeup of the offensive line, I'm just not sure about. You have a guy, Alan Herron, who's supposed to start at tackle, and he's played Division II. He hasn't played Division I. Kyle Long made some starts last year. He's probably going to be starting at guard. Josh Kaltenberger's probably our starting center, and he's a transfer from Purdue. And then you have Bow, who from Georgia, and it's like, how good's he going to be? And then Connor Fagan played a little bit last year. He played some last year as well. And then Isaiah Wright, too, from Buffalo. And one thing is, it's a lot of transfers. And it's like, what does that entail? What does that mean? Are they going to be ready to play? Are they going to know the system? Are they going to be used to the Big Ten? Because, yeah, Kaltenberger comes from Purdue, but coming from a D2 shorter university, like Alan Herron does, it's concerning. Even though he was committed to Penn State previously before committing to us, it's still a little bit scary to adjust to the Big Ten level, and he might not work out. And then Isaiah Wright comes from Buffalo, but that's still not Big Ten football, Big Ten pass rushers, and just having a lot of these transfers. And I know Bow comes from Georgia, but he wasn't able to get time at Georgia. And so you wonder, and I know it's tough to get time at Georgia along the offensive line. They have some complete dudes up front that are playing on Sundays, but still it's like, can these guys come together? Will these guys play at the level that we need them to play at? And I don't think that's guaranteed, and I don't know about this group up front. And we have to remember, new quarterback, and having a poor offensive line with a new quarterback can only mean trouble for your team and your offense and your team overall. It makes it so much harder for, one, the quarterback to get into rhythm, for the quarterback to feel comfortable in the pocket, to feel like he can step up and make throws when you have an offensive line that's not playing particularly well. And I'm not saying that's going to happen, but I think there's a decent chance that the line doesn't mesh early. And we play Michigan State week 2. Does the line affect us that much that we're not able to win that game? I think it's possible. And also it can make it harder to find our receivers down the field, and you can get a limited playbook if the offensive line isn't working well. And I trust Coach Locksley to find the best 5, but we need a solid group, at least a solid group, to have a chance to be decent this year. They don't have to be elite. We haven't been elite in the past, but I just think it has to be a solid group up front that gives us a chance to sometimes throw the ball down the field, a chance for MJ Morse or whoever's playing quarterback to play quarterback at a high level, and just those overall things. And we need that group to play decently well, I think, to have a chance to be good. And then as well as get Roman Hemby and the rest of that running back room and take some pressure off the quarterback in another way. The offense line is able to do that if they can run block well. And I don't know if that's going to be the case. And if Roman Hemby wants to have a better year than he had last year, which it wasn't a bad year, I want to make sure I emphasize that. But it wasn't a year where I was like, yeah, Roman Hemby improved from his first year where I thought he was going to be able to be 1,000-yard rusher. And so I look at all those things and I say, is the offensive line a problem right now? Yes, I'm concerned about it. And I think that they have to prove me wrong and it's kind of one of those things, I'll believe it when I see it for it not being a problem. That's all we have for today. Thank you for listening to Locked On Terps. Make sure you like and subscribe. We're here every day talking Maryland football and basketball. So thank you for listening to Locked On Terps.